Prior to working for the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning, Denise worked for a Fortune 500 company, holding a variety of positions, including president of one of their divisions, and then moved to president of a financial services firm. Denise, before we start on the webinar, can you tell us why you find strategic planning a key element to a company's success?
Absolutely. As Robert just mentioned, I was working for a Fortune 500 company when I was tapped to become president of a financial services company in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Now, not a surprise to anyone here, they didn't tap me to come in and be president because things were good. As a matter of fact, when I first interviewed, there was a trickle of red ink. But I thought, oh, I can turn this around. I think this will work fine. But of course, when I actually took the job, that little trickle of red ink had turned into a waterfall. And when we took that waterfall, I knew I need to turn the company around immediately. And I went to my direct reports. And sure enough, every single one of my direct reports knew exactly how to save the company. Unfortunately, every single one of them thought that something different. They all had different ideas. And I didn't come in here knowing the industry, so I didn't come in with the first 3 things you needed to do in order to turn this company around. So I needed to pull the team together. I needed to get all of their best thinking. We needed to research what our customers needed. We need to look at our competition. And we needed to develop a plan. We needed to select those few things we needed to do in order to turn that company around. And that's when I knew strategic planning was important, because it allowed us to share our ideas, it allowed us to determine what was most important, and it allowed us to develop the strategic initiatives that we had to execute in order to turn the company around. Well, there was a happy ending to the story. After 2 years, we made more profit in that second year than we had the whole previous history of the company. And over the 4 years I was there, we grew from a $20 million company to a $50 million company. So strategic planning is very important to me, and more specifically, strategic execution. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So first, strategic execution. Why is it important? Why are so many people interested? And here's what we see. We see people developing a terrific strategy, and instead of going from good to great, we find people going from great to mediocre. They developed a great strategy, the team was engaged, they selected some key initiatives they wanted to work on, and then 12 months later, there was little progress. What happened? Well, we all know the basic answer here is the urgent got away of the important. And yes, you absolutely need to work on the things that are very important to make the business run in the day-to-day business. But you can't only focus on the day-to-day. You also have to focus on the things that will get you to the future. So you need to balance that. 3 keys to successful execution. There are numerous causes of train wrecks. We're going to discuss the prominent detractors and how to avoid them. So let's get to the first one, and actually this is the 3rd most important one, and we're going to go in reverse order. So this is number 3, monitoring. What do we mean by when we say monitoring? These are the monthly meetings that allow you to monitor your progress on the key strategic initiatives. So earlier we mentioned that when you develop a strategy, in order to decide what you want to do in the next 12 to 18 months, you take to that 3 to 5 year vision and select a few strategic initiatives to work on. Those strategic initiatives need to be monitored on a monthly basis. And the reason why is it helps keep the team on track. You know, if you have to show up to a meeting every month and report on your progress, you're going to try and make sure you're getting things to the goal line. But in addition to that, it allows you to make changes when market conditions change. And let me give you an example of this. In August of 2001, I worked with a strategic planning team, and we were working in the remote video inspection market. So these are the inspection devices that allow you to look into various kinds of engines to see if they're a problem, and they allow you to take that look without taking the whole engine apart. So people who are interested are people who make gas turbine engines, so energy facilities, nuclear energy facilities. If you were responsible for a sewer system, you might use a remote video inspection device. And if you were in the aircraft industry, if you were a commercial aircraft company, you would want to be able to inspect your engines without taking them apart. And if you were also in the military market, you would want to inspect those military aircraft engines rather than always taking them apart. Well, we finished our strategic plan in August, and we had a great plan. We were going to focus one of our strategic initiatives on the commercial aircraft engine market. We knew that we had a product that was unparalleled by our competitors. Our product was easy to use, it was light, someone could easily stand on either a truck or a ladder, pull our device up and look into the engine with no problem at all. It had a very good human-machine interface. And we developed our action plan, and we felt we were really going to gain market share in this very lucrative and growing market. Then all of a sudden, September 11th. Yes, the planes hit the World Trade Center, hit the Pentagon. And all of a sudden, that market that looked so lucrative to us was no longer lucrative. The commercial airliners were going to be grounded as we recast how we flew. Many travelers were no longer traveling. And the market that we thought was a fast-growing market was going to stagnate. What do? Do you keep going on with the strategic plan because that's what we decided in August? Of course not. And that's the benefit of the monitoring process. When we got into the meeting, we looked, we said, this doesn't make sense. We can't focus on commercial airline industry anymore. We need to refocus our efforts and focus on the military aircraft, because I'm sure they're going to be out defending our nation, and I'm sure they're going to try and be mechanically fixing these engines in environments that are not very pleasant, and they're going to need a lot of remote video inspection equipment. So we changed our focus, and we changed our strategic initiative to, instead of penetrating the commercial airline industry, to moving over to the military industry, looking at the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and where we could better penetrate in these markets. So that's the other purpose of monitoring, is execution success is not only making sure we do what we said we would do, but also having that dynamic ability to make changes when business conditions change. Another area where you need to look at monitoring and making changes is when there's new information. So let's say one of your strategic initiatives was to develop a new product that would meet a certain group of customers' needs. And as you developed this new product, you went out there with a prototype, and you found, in fact, that even with your best thinking, this prototype was not going to meet their needs, and in fact, their needs were changing. Well, then it's time to shoot the action plan. Don't keep working on the action plan when it's not the highest and best use of your time. So what is monitoring? These are the monthly meetings to make sure you're making progress on your key strategic initiatives. It helps you keep your team on track, and it allows you to make changes based on market conditions or based on new information as you develop an action plan. Here are some of the pitfalls we find with the action planning process, the monitoring process. Is sometimes people say, oh, monthly is just too much. We don't make enough progress. We need to do it quarterly. Well, I don't know if you're like me, but I tend to leave things for the last minute. And I know when we're about to have our monitoring meeting, I all of a sudden get focused on the stuff that needs to be done for that monthly meeting. And it's a lot easier to pull things together for a monthly meeting because you're trying to accomplish those things that you wanted to do in a month. If you try to pull everything together that you were trying to accomplish over a quarter or over 3 months, it's really hard to catch up. And if you do fall behind, you tend to fall behind a lot farther, and it's difficult to get back on track. So we find the frequency that's most successful is a monthly meeting. Second, in order for the meetings to be efficient, is the action plans need to be updated before the meeting, so you're presenting a cogent picture of where you are in the action plan. This seems like a little detail, but if you're busy doing the nits and lights of updating your action plan, then people aren't really focused on the progress you're making and how they can help you. which leads to another pitfall. And this is when you're not making progress and everybody just blames you for not making progress. And in fact, it might be your fault. But what's more productive in the meeting is to problem solve of how we can get things back on track. How can we resolve bottlenecks? So let me give you an example. I was working with a client team, and we had an action plan that was pretty far behind. And one action step, we were going through the review, and the person responsible for that action step was going to be traveling internationally, and he wouldn't be able to get to it for the next 2 and maybe 3 months. So do we say, oh, that's okay? Or do we say, hey, I don't care if you're traveling internationally, you have to fix this? Or do we instead say, hey, what's the best way to move this forward so we're not losing 3 months? Is there someone else who could do this action step and actually step up so we can start moving the action plan forward? And that's the kind of problem solving that you need to do. Is there a bottleneck? Can we reallocate resources so that we can move the action plan forward? So rather than assess blame, let's see how we can solve the problem to make sure that we don't lose the momentum. Another pitfall is having a monitoring process and you only review the action plans that are off track. Now, on the surface, that looks very efficient because you're spending time fixing the problems in the places where you have problems. But don't forget, another purpose of the monitoring process is your ability to keep people informed on the key strategic initiatives that we've chosen. So let me give you an example. One team was only reviewing by exception, and there was a product development action plan that was on track, and the product development people would come in and say, product development is on track, and there'd be no discussion. But what happened, there they were ready to release the product, and they found that some key training initiatives had not been included in the action plan. Now, sometimes you just forget some steps in an action plan. And if instead of just reporting by exception, we had been reporting and saying this is what we accomplished and this is what we expect to do, and we expect the product to be released in 2 months, someone might have said, oh my goodness, we haven't done the training in the field as we said we would do, or maybe there's something we need to do with customer service to make sure they're ready for this product launch. So our suggestion is you make sure each action plan is reviewed, and it only takes 5 minutes for somebody to say, we're on track, here's what we did last month, and here's what we're going to do this next month. But in that 5 minutes, you've now brought everybody up to date on where that key strategic initiative is. And if new thoughts have come into play, or perhaps there's something we've forgotten, it's giving us a chance to actually move in and add that to the plan. We've already talked about what happens when business conditions change and project relevance. So when there really are business conditions that change, don't blindly move forward like my remote video inspection person. Don't keep going after commercial aircraft. Make a shift. The same as if a project becomes irrelevant. It may have been a terrific idea when we walked out of the strategic planning, but if as you learn more about it, you find it's really not the highest and best use of our time, let's take the time and shoot it and reallocate those resources. And then this is the one that leads many people astray, adding projects without taking one away. How does that happen? Well, you know what happens. Throughout the year, new ideas come up, and you want to go and work on these new ideas. And then you add a project, and then all of a sudden, instead of working on 8 projects, you're working on 15. And nothing's really moving forward. The great benefit of the monitoring process is here you know your key strategic initiatives that you've selected. If something new comes up that looks attractive, you can present it to the rest of the monitoring team, and they can assess, okay, this is something we really need to work on. But once you select you want to add something, you need to take something away. And the monitoring process gives you the structure of being able to change things, so something new is better, but also forces you to have the discipline to take something away so you just don't keep adding new things as new ideas come up. And this final one, declare victory before the initiative is accomplished. This is when you've decided you're going to develop a new product and you're going to develop this new product, and you hope to have $2 million of revenue by the end of the year. But what you do is you actually launch the product and declare victory before you've actually achieved the revenue. I've seen many teams do this. So they've launched the product, but then they don't do that basic blocking and tackling to make sure the product's a success. So as it enters the market in the first time, is there something wrong with the packaging? Do we need to change our customer service offering? Do we need to add a web video that explains truly how it's used so we can achieve penetration more quickly? We don't have to have our salespeople calling on customers. They can actually visualize it on the web. So don't declare victory before things are accomplished. So here's a checklist to see if your monitoring process is on track. First, make sure you're having monthly meetings. Make sure your team leaders are prepared. Identify problems, but more importantly, use the team to develop solutions and reallocate processes. Use this monitoring process as a way to keep your strategic planning dynamic. If you need to make changes because of business conditions or stop action plans or add some and take some off, the monitoring meeting is where you have the whole team together and you can make these decisions as a team. And the most important thing is when you walk out of that monitoring meeting, you need to have a clear picture of what will be accomplished by the next meeting. So monitoring, if you have a good monitoring process, it is one of the keys to successful execution. Now let's move on to the second most important, and that's having a clear roadmap of what you're trying to accomplish. So we said once again, when you leave strategic planning, you have strategic initiatives that you want to accomplish. And what that is a clear statement of intended results for each strategic initiative. You've all heard of SMART. That means that clear statement is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bounded. And behind each strategic initiative statement, you need detailed action plans that provide clear roadmaps so you achieve that. Why? This clarifies what needs to happen in order to achieve that initiative and focuses everyone on the result you're trying to achieve. Let's talk a little bit now about how. First, when you have a strategic initiative, you need to identify the team leader or champion. This is the person who has fire in his or her belly and really wants to achieve the objective. But that person can't work in a vacuum. They need to identify the team members who are going to support them to achieve this initiative. The team members, along with the team leader, will then get together and identify how can they accomplish the objective. How can they achieve the result that's required in this strategic initiative. And they need to develop a detailed action plan. Each step needs to be granular. These are not grandiose steps that will take place over 3 months. They will need to identify who is responsible for each step, how much time each step will take, and how much money. When you've got your action plans, ask your team, if we do all of these steps on this action plan, will we achieve the result? And many times people will have additional steps that you might need to add and other people who might not like to be on each step. But when you have those action plans, that's not enough. You need to understand how much time you have available to work on these action plans versus how much time you need for day-to-day. And you need to set aside a certain amount of time every month to work on action plans so that you do move the company forward while respecting what you need to do in order to keep the business running day-to-day. Because if you only focus on the day-to-day business, then you're not going to be prepared for the future and you're going to end up as an anachronism. But if you only focus on the future, you're going to lose the business that you have day-to-day. So you need to be sure you understand that there's a balance, and you can't make the assumption that people are doing nothing and they can simply move these strategic initiatives forward. Well, not a surprise when you take a look at your action plan, you're going to find that there's some overload. And this is a time when you need to look at your team and you need to resolve it. Are there any steps that can be delegated? Or is there anything that you do day-to-day that can be delegated? Is there anything that you might be able to eliminate? And are there any steps you might be able to reduce? Remember, one of the keys here is being able to balance the day-to-day with the strategic. So, having a clear roadmap, what are some of the pitfalls that can happen? Action plan development in a vacuum. This is when your team leader or champion decides he or she knows exactly how to do it and doesn't ask for help. This slows down the implementation because you don't have buy-in and your action plan is not that robust. Next, action plan steps are not granular enough. You're only looking at the big picture. And this goes hand in hand with not comprehending the full scope of the project. These problems, I have a great example of this, where a team was developing an action plan for the ERP system, and the IT person presented the plan, of course one done in a vacuum. He had 10 steps to the plan and assumed that the ERP system would be installed in 4 months. When we asked and we tried to dig deeper, he said, oh, I have all the background in Microsoft Project. I've got all the details. Well, what do you think happened? Sure enough, after 4 months, nothing had been really accomplished. And so, okay, the deadlines got moved out another 4 months. And sure enough, without granular steps and clear responsibilities, there was still no progress, or very little progress, I guess, on the action plan. Finally, the president had to step in and actually sit with the team and develop a detailed action plan and meet on a weekly basis so that they fully fleshed out exactly the full scope of the project and had all the steps and people responsible. It was an extremely painful process for everyone involved. So it's important we really look at the full scope and we get those steps granular enough. And then we've already talked about this last pitfall, which is juggling between the tactical day-to-day and the strategic initiatives. So in order to develop a clear roadmap, here's a checklist. First, do you have a champion, someone who has the fire in his or her belly and really wants to get this strategic initiative to the goal line? Who's on the team? Make sure it's a full team. Don't leave off people because you don't like working with them. If they're going to be a key part of getting this project completed, then you need to make sure you have them on the team. Are your action steps clear? Are they granular? And is there clear accountability for each step? And are the time requirements understood? And there are two pieces of time requirements. One is the actual time it will take to accomplish a task, and that may be something like 10 hours. But you may not be able to get 10 hours in one day. It may be 1, 2, or 3 hours in the first week, an hour the second week, 3 or 4 hours the third week of the month, and then you'll finish it up the fourth week of the month. So the actual time something will take may be 1 day or 10 hours, but the elapsed time may be the full month. Additionally, have you understood the financial requirements, and do you have enough financial resources? If you don't, then stop the action plan early, because it only gets people frustrated to be working on something only to find out in the middle of the project it won't be funded. And then have we balanced the day-to-day requirements against the strategic? So we've talked about monitoring as being very important to your execution success. And then as you monitor, you can't monitor without a clear roadmap. But most important is focusing on the few. This is key to your success. And this is where we find most teams make their biggest mistakes. That is selecting the few strategic initiatives to work on. And you know why. This is not a surprise to anyone. If you take on too many, you make a little progress on a lot, but not a lot of progress on a little. And by the end of the year, you feel like you really haven't made progress. How do you do this? Well, you have to start out with a strategic planning process that sorts out priorities. You need to understand which of your business segments are going to get the most emphasis. And when you say emphasis, how do you get that high return? What are the key opportunities that you want to focus on, given the return and measuring the probability of success? And then what are the internal priorities? What do we need to do in order to get where we want to go? The easy part of strategic planning is what you say yes to. The hard part of strategic planning is what you have to say no to. And often these are very good ideas. They're just not as good as some of the other ones. So, When you develop a strategy, you now have your vision of what you want to do for the next 3 to 5 years in one place. And you need to look at this document and then have your team select the key strategic initiatives that will really get you to the goal line. Some rules of the road. First, no more than 10. Even with my big companies, when you start moving over 10, you start running into trouble. And the number becomes much less than 10 if you have mega initiatives like an ERP system. So, what are the pitfalls? First, one of the biggest ones I hear is we select 8 strategic initiatives and then all of a sudden someone says, "Oh, but we have to do this." And someone else says, "Oh, but we have to do this." And you turn around, your 8 strategic initiatives turns into 15. Well, if there really are some things that you need to do, and they've been promised or they're have-to-haves, then they need to become part of your strategic initiatives, and you only need to choose 3 or 4 more. But if there are have-to-haves, you may need to include them, but keep that number down to the 8 to 10 that we're suggesting. And this next one, the inability to say no, that goes hand in the hand with the have-to-do. You have to not be able to say no to certain things, even though they seem very important. Because the more you say yes to, the less you actually get done. And the real pitfall is when you see a strategic planning process that does not allow research, so that when you come back with the research on your markets and opportunities, you can make good decisions around what's important. And that allows you to discuss the relative importance in the context of your other choices. So research is paramount to making sure you're making good decisions. So let's look at the checklist. How do you get to the focus on the few checklist? First, are you really focused on the few strategic initiatives that will truly achieve your strategy? Is your selection of strategic initiative balanced? Are all your strategic initiatives internally focused, so you may have a more operational team, or all of your strategic initiatives focused on your markets, and you're not really building the infrastructure that you're going to need in order to achieve your market success? So when you're looking at your strategic initiatives, make sure you've got some that are market focused, some that are focused on new opportunities, and some that are focused on internal. What are the things we need to do to get where we want to go? Too many strategic initiatives, we already talked about that. And you need to link your strategic initiatives back to your strategy, your goals, and your mission. Each strategic initiative should clearly show what it's going to do to help you achieve your strategy. Some more things you have to look at is, have you clearly communicated these few initiatives throughout your organization so that there's no question as to what you really want to focus on, and that you have the whole organization behind you? And if you can answer this question, then you've got the right strategic initiatives. If you accomplish these initiatives, will your company be in a better place? So for a minute, I'd like to talk a little bit about communicating your strategic initiatives. And I'd like to go back to the company I was running, the financial services company I was running. When I had been there 2 years, we had a wonderful profit year and everybody got bonuses. And I decided now was the time to go out and do an employee survey. Hey, I'm not a dumb CEO. When you just paid somebody a bonus, you're probably going to come up with some good results. And I asked them on the survey to add a couple questions, and they were, do you understand our strategy, and do you know what we need to do in order to accomplish our strategy? So the results came back. There was some good news and there was some bad news. The good news is the employees were very happy working within our organization, and they were finding their jobs very fulfilling. And the bad news was they didn't have a clue about the strategy, and they didn't have a clue on what they needed to do to move the strategy in the direction that we wanted to go. This kind of puzzled me because I communicated a lot to our folks. So I went to our HR person and I said, Susan, what do we do? She looked at me and said, you know, Denise, I don't know. You communicate so much. So let me tell you what we did. We communicated every year what the strategy was, and then quarterly I sat down with groups of about 8 and I explained what we had accomplished the last quarter and what we were going to accomplish the next quarter. By my way of thinking, we were communicating a lot. But apparently it wasn't getting through. So to make a long story short, here's what we decided to do. We decided to get up in front of the group after we developed our strategy once again and communicate, here's our strategy and here are our key initiatives. But at the end of that presentation, I stopped and I said, I want to know what each of you are going to do in support of these key strategies and key strategic initiatives. And next month, I want each department to present back to the rest of the company what you're going to do to support the plan. Well, everybody was scared, and you know the managers were the most scared because they were sure people were going to come up with awful ideas. But I'll bet you also know what really happened. Each department got up and presented what they were going to do in support of our strategic initiatives. Do you think they came up with better ideas than we did? Sure. Do you think that they then were very focused on what they needed to do to move the company forward? Absolutely. And do you think they now knew what they had to do in order to achieve the strategy and work on the strategic initiatives? Absolutely. And from that point forward, the company moved ahead very aggressively and faster than it had in the past because we had taken the time to communicate the strategic initiatives, but instead of just communicating, we had made it a two-way street, and we got everyone's buy-in, and we got their hearts and minds thinking about what they needed to do to move the company forward. And that really enabled us to be successful in the future. So, execution is important, but you can't leave execution to chance. You can't sit there and say, we've developed a strategic plan, we know what we need to work on, and let it happen. In order to be successful, it's important you monitor to make sure you're on track and to make course corrections where necessary. It's important to have clear roadmaps and action plans who define what it is you're going to do, who's going to do it, how much time is it going to take, how much money, and when will you achieve that objective. You need to focus on the few. You need a strategic plan that allows you to bubble up the top priorities. You need to allow time for research so that when you make your decisions, you make them in a fact-based way, not based on top-of-mind thinking. You have to have balanced decision-making so that you have all the people in the room from representing your sales and marketing, your customers, your operations, your financial and internal administrative functions, so that you hear everyone's thinking and you choose the few things that are most important. And that was the key word, choose. You need to make choices. The easy part is saying yes. The hard part is saying no to things that are great ideas, but they just aren't as good as the ones you've selected. And that's selecting those few strategic initiatives to work on. So, strategic planning, your strategic plan is one of the keys to your execution success. So if you think your strategic planning process is not setting you up to make good decisions around key strategic initiatives, because either you lack a consistent approach, it's just based on top-of-mind thinking, or you don't have an analysis function, we'd love to have you learn more about strategic planning. We can't do it in a 45-minute webinar, but we do have a 2-day seminar for people who attend this workshop. That we have a special price, which is $9.95, and our regular is $18.95. And you will learn everything you need to freshen up your strategic plan and really work on bubbling those priorities so that you select great strategic initiatives and move your company forward. Other alternatives are an in-house workshop, which of course is 5 or 10 times the cost of actual strategic planning workshop. And then if you want full process consulting, where we work on the process and you work on the strategy. But that's, we wanted to talk about keys to successful execution. We talked about monitoring. We talked about clear roadmaps. And we talked about choosing the few.